Welcome and thank you for attending the VXSuite Technology Innovation Conference Part 2, the deep dive. We wanted to walk you through the modules of VXSuite and talk with you a little bit about how partners use VXSuite in order to enhance their business offering. With us today is Michael Brown. He's our Vice President of Operations and all things engineering and cool. Michael is our go-to guru guy, so if you have questions, he's definitely the one that can answer them. Michael, I'll let you go ahead and start and take it away. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Amy. Yes, I do hold a VP title, but at heart I'm a geek. I think you're going to see a little bit different presentation than you have in the past from our groups. I really kind of want to show you the technology. I'm really not going to – I have one PowerPoint slide to show you. The rest of the time we're just going to spend inside of the interfaces. Try and point out the things to kind of back up, I think, the overall message that you were presented earlier, which is kind of that cycle of customer where you're doing some assessment initially. After that is put in place, you need to kind of move to a monitoring and fix mode. Also, over the life of that customer, you need to do what you can to protect the QoE. And then at the end of the day, if you've done a really good job, show you some different ways that you can take credit. So that's kind of the plan. Within VXSuite, we have 4 modules currently, a 5th that's due to be released that very end of the year, very beginning of next year. Some of those I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on. So the VX Record module may show you the interface a little bit. It's call recording. It's a product that sits a little bit to the side of the core of the other modules. So may spend a little bit of time on that if we have time, but most of what I'm going to talk about today is our VX Tracker module and our VXPulse module. We'll bring VX Mobile into VX Tracker because it really is, VX Tracker basically is the display or the presentation mechanism for VX Mobile. And what we're doing is just sourcing some information that's a little bit different in nature. Then the VX Dashboard product, like I say, is under active development. We're targeting for end of the year is our hope. First of the year, kind of worst case, and I'll talk a little bit about the capabilities and what's coming with that product. But again, most of what we're going to be talking about today is VX Tracker and VXPulse. And I think I'm going to start with VX Tracker because that's really where we started. VX Tracker initially was marketed and I guess continues to be marketed as a call accounting package. So back in the day when long distance was very expensive and that was a huge concern operationally, companies found themselves with the need to basically do departmental chargebacks. So let me pull the call activity from my PBX, let me figure out who's using the system, then I want to give those different departments their individual bills so that we can kind of recoup those costs. VX Tracker is still completely a viable solution for that. And we sell a lot of it as pure call accounting. But we've also seen a little bit of a shift. As long distance has not become quite the same level of expense for a company that it used to be, we see more and more interest in using VX Tracker, mainly for analytics. So I'm not necessarily interested in what the costs are for the calls, but I'm more interested in what's happening with the activity. I may be a sales manager and the people that report to me have a primary responsibility for either fielding inbound calls or making outbound calls. And I've set up some key performance indicators around those sales individuals as far as the number of calls they should be making, the amount of time they should be spending on the phone. Or I may be looking at things like I'm going to move from my PRI trunks and I'm going to move to a SIP trunking solution. But I need to understand how to size that. VX Tracker is a tool that can kind of provide you some of those answers. And that's kind of the shift that we've seen. Let's move from a pure call accounting perspective to something that's going to provide me with information on either the activity of the individuals that work for me, or I want to gain some metrics on activity because I'm looking to move from one solution to another solution, and that's where VX Tracker can play. VX Tracker has been around for a long time. the benefit to us having been around a long time is that we've seen pretty much every PBX that's out there. The architecture of VXTracker is such that there's a collection mechanism. So one part of the application that's responsible for getting the information from the PBX. And we can do that in a variety of fashions. Depending on how the PBX produces CDR or lends itself to having a connection into it to pull the CDR, that's one part of the application. Once we receive the data, then it goes into a small piece of logic that we call a parser. The parser's job basically is to take a look at the raw data, figure out what it is, apply some logic to that, and convert that into a standard call record within the VXTracker application. Those little parsers are very easy to create. They're also very easy to modify. So even if we were to run into a new PBX out there, a new data stream, it's pretty easy for us to come up with a solution to be able to deal with that. And that's just kind of the background to VXTracker and a little bit of the architecture of it. So let's start looking at some of the information that you can take a look at. So I'm going to start within the expense menu. Again, started with the call accounting, so we have this expense label, but this is a very good idea, a very good menu where these reports can provide you information about what's happening with your activity. So at the highest level, we're just going to run an expense division level report. VXTracker provides the ability to create an organizational structure. So in this particular demonstration, we have a division, we have departments, we have users, and we have extensions. So an extension belongs to a user belongs to a department belongs to a division. And then as we run those various levels of reports, we're seeing that data rolled up. So very highest level, I can get a breakdown of the number of calls by division. You can do some quick, easy filtering, only inbound, only outbound. The difference between in, out, and both is in/out is going to provide you with two columns, one for your inbound calls, one for your outbound calls. We try to make it very easy to sort data within the interface. So all of the column headers you'll see are hyperlinks. The function basically is I can click on one of those columns and it's going to sort. I can click on it again and I will get the reverse sorting. So very easy for me to run this report, sort by inbound calls, and understand that actually it's the Western division that made the most inbound calls or took the most inbound calls today. Anytime in the column you see the leftmost value as a hyperlink, it basically means that there's a drill down. So I can drill into the Western division. That's now going to drop me to the department level. So those departments that belong to the Western division. Another level of drill down, I can keep going, and now I'm down at a user level. If I click down to a user level, now I'm getting the individual calls themselves. So you get basic information about the call, the date, time, whether it was in or out, what was the caller ID or the number dialed. We take the area code and exchange, convert that to city state, provide you with a duration, and then again, that costing component of VXTracker provides you with the amount. I go back here and run an expense user report. So now instead of starting at that division level, I can start at a user level and get the same summary level data. So this is a good way just to kind of track the activity user by user. There's a whole bunch of users in here, if you can see as I scroll down through here. It's unlikely that I, as maybe a department manager, want to receive this much information because I'm only interested in a small subset of that data. The options button is kind of key for filtering a report. So I'm going to click on options. It's going to bring up another window here. All of the items here are some filter that I can apply to the report to restrict the amount of data that comes back to me. So again, let's just assume this departmental manager, and perhaps I'm in charge of the accounting and in Hawaii. That would be a tough gig to have, run the accounting division in Hawaii. So select that as a filter. Save those changes. The yellow box down here lets me know that I've successfully applied that filter. Scroll down, tell it that I'm done doing the filtering, rebuild my report, and now those users, as you can see, the only ones I'm seeing are the ones that belong to that Department of Accounting. So very easy to filter a targeted report. the next step to that would be that that's all well and good, but I don't necessarily want to have to log in every day, apply this filter to run this report. And that's where scheduling would come in. So it's very easy to schedule this report, just have it delivered via email. Lots of options to that. So we could run daily reports. I could run reports only on specific days of the week. I could run a monthly level report. Very granular control over how much information I want to bring back when that report fires. Delivery to multiple email addresses. You can either deliver body of email or you can send the data as an attached CSV file. So if you're running a very large report with lots of data, you want to bring that into Excel, do some additional filtering, graphing maybe, what have you, then you can just send the data as an attached CSV. You can send it to a printer. I think this is a nod to the old days when you just have a printer hanging off the back of your PBX and it would just sit there and print out all of the calls. Or you can also have that CSV file created and saved to a network share. So if you had another program that for some reason needed that data, pretty easy to dump that out to a known location and then you can come and pick that information up. All right, there's lots of other reports inside of VXTracker that you can run. And although we kind of call this the deep dive, we're still just going to be scratching the surface with a lot of these applications. But at the end of today, you should have much more information than you did have before. Hopefully a little bit of an idea of when these technologies can aid you. So I'm not going to go through a lot of these other reports. But what I do want to do is show you a little bit on the trunking. And the reason is, I'm going to change some filters here while I talk. The reason is because this can actually provide you with some very important or beneficial information if you are going into one of those customers that they're looking to change out their PBX. And if it's going to move from a traditional TDM system to a voice over IP system, one of the most important things to understand is the call volume, because as you move them from copper lines that are only carrying voice now to putting them onto network infrastructure that potentially is also being used for data, or at a minimum using the same equipment that maybe a data VLAN and a voice VLAN will share, it's going to be important for you to size in your sizing to understand how much volume they actually do. If you go back to a customer and say, okay, tell me how many people you have and tell me how many calls each of them make on average, that's decent information and is definitely something that at a minimum you should do. But if you do have the ability to put VXTracker in play, collect call detail records from their existing phone system, then we can provide you with some very good information about that utilization. So I'm going to run this traffic study report, and I've just selected a few of the trunk groups. And what this is doing for me is a couple of things. So this is a Quest trunk group. The first part of this is capacity. So this used to be used to make sure that either I had enough PRIs or that I didn't have too many PRIs. But now in our scenario, what we're looking for is maximums. So off of this trunk group, what was the maximum number of simultaneous calls that were going out? That's going to be important to you for sizing. Or even if they're moving from PRI to SIP trunks, again, information that's fairly critical to you to being able to deliver to that customer a solution that's going to meet their needs. You also get things, so the max as a percentage and also the average as a percentage. You'll also get some information about when their peak hours are, when their peak dates were for the reporting period that you were running. I only ran this for a single day, so there isn't a peak date number 2. Also try and do an estimate on the amount of time where all trunks were busy, and also the amount of time when there was no usage on the trunking. The second part of this is going to give me volume information. So just the total number of inbound calls, total number of outbound calls, and how many minutes for each as part of this reporting. The last part of this on a trunk-by-trunk basis is what type of calls are these? Are these local or long distance? And if they are long distance, what type of long distance? This can be beneficial if you have the ability to maybe provide back to that customer solutions from multiple vendors. And those vendors may be better at providing local versus long distance, either from a cost or from a performance perspective. This is going to allow you to understand what is that customer actually doing so that you can, again, provide back to them the best possible options. There's one other thing that we can do based on that, trunking information, and that's within the analytics report. And again, it's using the same information, so some of it is the same, average usage, max usage, etc. But the other critical thing that you're going to see pop out of this is based on that information, what's the estimated average VoIP bandwidth and what's the estimated max voice bandwidth that you would have to provide for them to be able to do the same level of calling. So again, here you're simply in VXTracker, you're putting in kind of the average kbps for whatever codec you're going to choose to deploy. You're letting VXTracker crunch through that information, and at the end of the day, it'll tell you that at max, you're going to need to provide 680.8 kbps in order to handle the calls that are currently going across the MCI-T1 circuit. So pretty valuable information. There is a bit of effort in it, in that you need to get the call detail records from the customer. We actually, obviously have to bring them into a VXTracker. But the level of granularity of the information that you can get by looking at the call detail records is just an order of magnitude better than what you're going to be able to get from the customer if they're just estimating or guesstimating for you. Okay, again, lots of other reports inside of here, but just with our time constraints today, I think I'm going to jump over to VXPulse. If you have any specific questions about VXTracker, please pop them into your little chat controls there. We'll keep an eye on those, and then after we've accumulated a couple, maybe we'll switch back over and answer those. All right, so this is one component when we talk about that assess. So I want to understand what's happening on a customer's environment currently or before I deploy my own solution. I'm going to switch over to VXPulse now, and we're going to kind of continue that story, and then we'll start touching on some of the other high-level bullet points that were presented to you. So here's the point where I do show you the one PowerPoint slide. Because I think it makes sense for us to make sure that we understand the architecture of VXPulse before we spend too much time in the interface. At its heart, VXPulse is network monitoring and management. So, if you think about network monitoring tools, SolarWinds type things, VXPulse stacks up feature by feature very nicely against those other products. So we're going to do things like ping nodes, do trace routes, collect SNMP data, catch traps, collect syslog, collect flow, all of those network monitoring things that you would expect to have within a product we have. We're a little bit different in a couple of respects. The first of those is that we try really hard to bring a voice over IP lens to that network monitoring. And what I mean by that is VXPulse, the origin of it really was we were talking to VXTracker customers as they were going through voice over IP deployments. We heard their war stories, even though we weren't really involved in those projects. And it just got us thinking, is there something that we can do to help people as they're either in the midst of a voice over IP deployment or they've deployed one and they're having some challenges with it. And monitoring is a big piece of that. But again, that voice over IP lens, we know at the end of the day that the quality of the calls, the ability to make the calls is why some of our customers are deploying monitoring. So I'm going to show you a couple of features that are very voice over IP specific, and then also show you a couple of examples of where we're using just more standard network monitoring data, but trying to help you understand how that potentially will impact your voice over IP. The second way that we're kind of different from your standard monitoring solution is that VXPulse is cloud hosted. So the interface that we're going to be going through, it runs in a cloud hosted infrastructure. That's how I log in. That's how I do the configuration. That's how I run the reports. I'm not deploying a server with a bunch of software into a customer's location to do it. That provides some fairly key benefits, not least of which is that VXPulse being completely multi-tenanted, I can have all of my customers' monitoring and alarming information roll up into a single interface. Also, because it's multi-tenanted, if it makes sense to, I can provide access to this information directly to the customers. So some fairly big benefits to that. Obviously, the hurdle with a cloud-hosted network monitoring solution is no one is going to allow nodes on the internet to come into their network and connect to these monitoring interfaces or these nodes that we want to monitor. So the architecture that we end up deploying is we put what we call a remote agent on the customer network segments that we want to monitor. And that's that purple box that sits basically in the middle of this slide. So it's the remote agent's job to do that data collection. So if I want to ping something or collect SNMP or catch traps, that's the collector. The remote agents are just another node on a customer's network segment. It can be installed just as a service onto a Windows server, or we sell a small form factor hardware-software combination. It's a micro appliance. It's small enough that basically it'll fit in the palm of your hand. One of the key differences here is that the hardware runs a Linux kernel. This becomes important, how you deploy, whether I put it on a Windows server or whether I deploy it on a hardware box. When we talk about our active QoE testing, we'll spend quite a bit of time on that because it's kind of one of the key voice over IP features. And that is the ability for one agent to make a voice or video call to another agent. Running an agent on a Windows server has some limitations. You cannot tag packets for QoS, which can be very, very important when you're trying to figure out what's happening with voice over IP. And an agent on a Windows system can only place and take calls from one other agent, which will only be sufficient in the simplest of topologies. So typically, if you're looking at doing that active QoE testing, you're going to want to be on the hardware-software combination, that box solution. Coming soon will also be the ability for us to provide to you a VM appliance. So if you're in a customer's environment and they're running VMware and you would rather deploy as an appliance within that infrastructure, then we'll have that ability. That is also running on a Linux kernel. So you would get the QoS tagging as well as the ability to call to multiple agents if you deploy that solution. All right, so once the remote agent starts collecting the information, then it turns around and sends that out to the cloud over an outbound SSL connection. So from a customer network perspective, the only thing you need to do to deploy the solution is, if I'm going to put a piece of hardware in their network, obviously I'll want them to give me an IP address, configure that on the device so that when they plug it in, it'll have that network connectivity. And then they also need to make sure that they allow that device to make an outbound SSL connection to the internet. Okay, enough PowerPoint. Let's go into the application. So within VXPulse, here on the left-hand side, you can see I've basically have this tree structure that I can build up. This is kind of key to the multi-tenancy within VXPulse. In that, when I create a login to the system, I specify which node that login has access to. It will then be able to see anything underneath it, but it will not be able to see anything either parallel to it or above it. So again, makes it very easy for you to control who can see what information within the application. I'm starting with the ops view here. You can think of this as a little bit like Visio in that you can see I've got these different nodes. I can make these connectors between them. I can basically utilize this to lay out the devices that I'm monitoring to match my network topology, either logical or physical, whatever makes no sense for you. Each of those monitored devices has the colored bar underneath them, which indicates the health of the device. So a green bar means no alarm, a red bar means a critical alarm, purple is major, yellow, which we don't see, is minor. So at a quick glance now, I can also understand what devices are having issues. The little blue circles in this diagram are remote agents. So again, these are the workhorses, the ones that are doing the collection and then sending that out to the internet. The other reason that I start with the ops view is it allows us to kind of work through a scenario. So just for argument's sake, let's assume that on the left-hand side here, I have a headquarters location. This is where my PBX equipment sits or will sit. This is where I've got, my SIP trunks or my PRI lines or whatever PSTN connectivity I have coming in. And the customer has a small branch location. Okay, they've got a handful of users. It's small enough that I don't want to bring in PSTN connectivity. I don't want to deploy some type of PBX equipment local to them. What I want them to do when they're doing calls is I want them to use some type of site-to-site connectivity to get the connectivity back to the main PBX, and then that's how they're going to get their dial tone, or that's going to be how the calls are routed in. So this could be an MPLS circuit. This could be a point-to-point T1. This could be an internet-based VPN tunnel. So they both have an internet connection. I'm going to create a site-to-site VPN tunnel, and that's how that voice over IP is going to get back to the headquarters location. In this scenario, this link is going to be one of the scariest things for you. So if a user in this remote location goes to make a phone call, they pick up, they dial, and the call quality is horrible, they're going to come back to you and say, hey, what you deployed just is not, it just is awful. Come in, fix it, change it, do something, make it right. With VXPulse, one of the first things that I would do in this type of scenario is deploy the remote agents in each of those locations, and then use that active QoE function to place a test voice call across that circuit. I'm going to double click on one of those agents. That will allow me then to go into the configuration and just kind of show you some of those options. So configuration as far as monitoring gets stored into a configuration template. The thought process here is, let's say just as for argument's sake that I need to monitor a Cisco ASA firewall. Once I figure out what I want the monitoring profile to be for a Cisco ASA firewall, I put it into a configuration template, and then when I go to monitor the second, I don't have to recreate the wheel. All I have to do is assign that same template. Now I've got kind of a standardized monitoring profile for all my Cisco ASAs. Everything from what data we're collecting to when we're raising alarms. This configuration template I'm placing on one of my agents. So with an agent, there's only a couple of things that are important. The main and primary use for it is this QoE tab, which is the active QoE test, which again, have one agent make a voice or video call to another agent. Configuration options, I'm going to enable it. I can choose the codec. This is where I'm going to determine whether I'm doing voice or whether I'm doing video. Choose whichever one you're going to deploy because you want to put that same traffic out during your test. Call duration. So how long do I want each of those test calls to last? The number of simultaneous calls that I want to do. TOS setting is all about QoS. So if you're doing, as an example, expedited forwarding, that's going to convert to a TOS setting of 184. That way, when those calls are placed, we're going to tag those packets so that they're going to ride the configured QoS. We want an apples-to-apples test here. How often do I want the test calls, and when do I want them made? So this configuration, 7 days a week, 24 hours, every 5 minutes, do 6 simultaneous calls. They're going to last 30 seconds. They're going to use the G711 codec, and we're going to tag them for expedited forwarding. All of the tabs in here represent something that we can do, and they also all follow a similar pattern. The top section of the template is all about what do I want to collect, when do I want to collect it, then maybe some test-specific parameters. The rules section is all about alarming. So any of the data that you're collecting using VXPulse, you can generate an alarm against. I'm going to click on this edit link. What will happen is it's going to pop up another window here. It will display the monitor rules that are applicable to doing an active QoE test. So if I'm testing voice over IP for quality, there's a handful of metrics that I'm collecting and one that I'm calculating. So we're looking at packet loss, delay, and jitter. Based on that information, then a MOS value is assigned to a call. Any of those values you can alarm on. Now, initially, if you're going to do just a network assessment, you're probably not going to set alarming up because you're just data collection mode. But if we kind of skip ahead and talk about that, that protect QoE section of the presentation, once I've deployed a voice over IP solution to a customer, this is a very easy way for me to make sure that that customer is still is maintaining a good quality of experience with their voice over IP solution. Leave those agents in place, have them continue to do those calls, and oh, by the way, why don't you send us an alert anytime you see the MOS value that's below 3.5. If any of these metrics are not what you would want to see as far as your alarming threshold, it's very easy to create your own. As an example, packet loss greater than 10%, that's probably too high a threshold. So you'd probably want to go in and drop the, create one maybe at 5% or 3% or whatever you consider kind of that barrier or that threshold value. All right, so that's one part of it. One thing you may notice is that nowhere in this screen am I specifying what other agent this agent should contact. There's another section to that configuration which borrows the concept of a route. And when I create a route, I basically choose the other agent I want it to make the call to. I provide that route a name, so it's something like VXTDev to Americom Capture. And I save it. And then what will happen is this agent will begin placing test calls to this to agent using the parameters that we just looked at. The reason that we separate the route out is because we want to give you total control over that, over the test call paths. So depending on the topology of the solution that you're going to deploy, you're going to want to do call paths differently. This is very easy, right? Basically, I have headquarters call remote, and I have remote call headquarters. But if we were to maybe assume that this LVM is a third site, I don't know that I necessarily would have the LVM site call our remote site. That may not be how calls would flow. Everything may just go back to headquarters. So again, are you deploying something that's fully meshed? Is it hub and spoke? Whatever the topology is, then you're going to create the routes, have the agents in place so that you can test those network segments. Now, so far I've always talked about this being, two different sites. It's completely feasible and there's value to doing it even if all I have is my headquarters location. If my headquarters location is large enough, maybe I've got at the farthest point of the network, if there are half a dozen network switches that a call would have to traverse in order for it to be able to get to the PBX and then go out, it's very easy to test the LAN. Is the LAN capable of handling the voice over IP or the video call volume that we are going to put onto it? Let me get that information before I end up doing the deployment. All right, so let's look at the goodies. So I'm going to run my quality of experience active QoE assessment calls report. I'm running this at a very high level inside of the tree structure. Because I'm running it at that level, what it's going to do is provide me a list of all of the routes that have data that are underneath that node. So here you can see in the sample database we have lots of those. At the highest level, you're just getting average information for the reporting period, which by default is the day. So average user experience good, MOS, delay, jitter, packet loss, and then the total number of calls that were made. We're also taking that data, providing it to you in some graphical representations. This data doesn't make a lot of sense to look at aggregated across multiple routes. What does it mean that I've got 0.4% packet loss across 94 routes? Not a lot of value there. So then instead what you would then do is select a single route. So let's click into this single route. I'm going to get the same information, right? Okay. But here the average user experience is terrible. The MOS is 3.27. There's my delay. There's my jitter. There's my packet loss and the total number of calls. We take each of those test calls and drop them into one of these qualitative categories. Good, great, okay, poor, terrible. Something we need to fix is we've sorted these alphabetically. Great, if you look at it from a quality perspective, should actually come before good. Anyway, I get that question a lot, so I just jump in and explain it now. What this is allowing me to see is that I occasionally have a good call, but overall, most of the calls are awful. So let's look and see if we can figure out why. So here's my MOS value over time. You can see that I started low at about 3. I spiked up a little bit, and it looks like it's been degrading over time. If I look at delay, I would expect that the delay, jitter, and packet loss will have an inverse relationship to the MOS value. So when the MOS is down, I would expect one of those other variables to be up. We can see that delay was up, jitter was up, and packet loss was up. And just looking at this, I mean, the low point of loss seems to be about 2%. I seem to be, averaging, maybe in the 4.5% range. My jitter seems okay. My delay is higher than I think I would like, but it's not probably the primary factor. So now I'm really looking at a packet loss issue. That's probably where I should focus most of my time. A final drill down into this report, I can click on the route name and it'll give me the details for every one of those test calls. So you can see an OK call had about 3% packet loss. Terrible, I'm spiking up to 10% packet loss. Let's go back to our ops view. Okay, so I'm doing these test calls and I've noticed that I've got a packet loss issue. So now there are some other things that we can do from a monitoring perspective to try and understand what's causing that. The first thing that I would be suspicious of is I don't have enough bandwidth, especially if this is like a site-to-site VPN tunnel. So now I'm going to use VXPulse to collect bandwidth information. I'm going to collect it from this device on the border of headquarters, and I'm going to collect it from the internet connection on the remote location. What that's going to allow me to do, and we collect that just via SNMP. So the only thing that you need to do in order to be able to collect that data is you need to know the IP address of that device, and then you need to know the read community string for that device so that we can go and pull that information. Now if I look at it, this is a router. It's got lots of interfaces on it. You can see that in the grid down here, I'm showing my in kbps, my out kbps. And there's a couple of different ways for me to look at this data. There's kind of a Gwiz way. Okay, so I'm going to grab this interface 106. I'm going to look at my bandwidth charting. This is going to graph for me inbound, outbound. The Gwiz part of it is, okay, well, let me select that little time slice. I'm going to zoom in on it down below here. Oops, I'm on the wrong one. Zoom in on down below here to basically just get a little more granular view of what that traffic actually looked like. Just kind of, again, drill in, if you will, to see what's actually occurring a little bit more on this. Since I started on the wrong tab, I'm going to go ahead and jump to that. The other thing that we can do with VXPulse is collect flow information. We support NetFlow and JFlow. And flow information, for those of you that don't know, is just bandwidth utilization information on steroids, basically. So instead of me just knowing that it was either inbound or outbound, the other thing that I will know is that every packet that crosses that device, I will know source IP address, destination IP address, and the port that was used, which will allow me to figure out what protocol, what type of activity is it. So now if I flip over to this flow tab, the top section is still going to be my bandwidth information. But now if I select that time slice, what I'm going to see is the flow data. So we've started with top applications. So I can see that in that utilization, far and away the port with the most utilization was TCP port 63053. Okay. If I want to, then I can flip to look at what are the top sources, who's sending the data. Okay, so this is 185.50.26.10. Who's receiving most of the data? And in this case, it's 10.101.2.10.174. So this is a node that's likely inside my network just based on the IP address. I know that it's receiving a ton of information to TCP port 63053. The other thing that we can do with this, so let's go back to my destinations here. Let me double click on that guy, and then I can also see what else, what other data is coming into that one particular network node. Again, here you can see that far and away most of the traffic has been using that TCP port. Where this can be valuable is if I go back to a customer, I've done the test calls, I see the packet loss, I collect bandwidth information, I see that they're just using more bandwidth than they have available, or else they can't do that. But they're using all their available bandwidth, therefore some of my packets are being dropped on the floor. The routing can't keep up, it fills up the queue, it starts dropping the data. If you go back to a customer and report nothing but that, their very next question will be to you, well, what is using the bandwidth? Because I don't think we should be using all of it. That's where the flow information can really be a big feather in your cap. The configuration for flow is a little more complicated. First of all, the device has to support one of those flow protocols. Secondly, you have to configure in the device for the device to send its flow data down to the collection agent responsible for it. So if you don't control that network infrastructure, you will have to have the customer's participation to do that configuration, but then you'll be able to provide that reporting. You can also do just a more generic report. So this is a more generic bandwidth report, and this is something that would be more applicable for me maybe to generate as a PDF document and put into a presentation back to the customer. You're not getting that zoom-in capability, but what you're looking at is just being able to show them what's the bandwidth utilization by interface. In addition to the in-out kbps, we're also able to do a calculation on percent occupancy. It does require that you basically tell VXPulse, what is the connection on the WAN side of this device, if you will. So am I attached to, is this a Comcast or cable circuit where I've got, huge down but limited up? If you provide that information to us, then you can also do a calculation based on capacity. This can be really good if you set up alarmings on capacity. So again, after deployment, I am in the mode of monitoring and fixing and protecting your QoE, and I want to receive an alarm anytime I see that your bandwidth utilization approaches 80% or 85% of its capacity, whatever you feel is kind of appropriate for that. All right, back to my ops view here. There are some other things that you can do that may seem silly at first, but actually can be fairly powerful. Let's talk about a solution maybe where I'm going to resell a hosted voice over IP solution. So let's make the same assumption. Left side is headquarters, but now right side is a hosted provider. You're not going to be able to deploy a VXPulse agent inside of a hosted provider's location. They're just not going to allow you to do that. But in a hosted solution, typically I'm completely dependent on this internet connection. What's the internet connectivity between my location and that hosted provider? I'm going to drop an agent in the customer's location. I'm going to do nothing more than ping and do a trace route to the border of that hosted provider. So at some point there will be a device there that's going to respond to the ICMP that's going to allow you to do that. Sounds kind of simplistic. Sorry, let me find my demo node here. But there's quite a bit of power in it. So this is a device. We've got some Traceroute data. All I'm doing is basically scheduling a trace route. When I do that, now I'm going to be able to see what's happening over time with the delay. So this is sample data, and I think we screwed up the decimal points or something because obviously 169-second delay, they can probably mail a letter faster than they can get a packet over there. But the concept is sound. What I'm looking for is, do I have spikes when the delay between my location and that hosted provider goes up? Do they happen the same point every day? The other thing you're going to be able to do is look at things like hop counts. Are the hop counts changing all the time on that internet connection between me and that provider? The other thing you can do is if you do find one that's particularly bad, I was looking for one that we hadn't messed up the data on, but you can drill into the individual traceroute result and see hop by hop what's happening. So this is the same data you're going to get if you sit at a computer at the customer's location and do a manual traceroute. But we're collecting it over time, we're storing it over time. So now if the customer comes back to us and says, we had a really bad call at this time, you can go back in the reporting, take a look at this information, see what was happening on that internet connection, to figure out what it was that was causing the issue. Was it just internet connectivity, or is it something else? The other thing that you'll be able to do if you're doing, again, something as simple as a ping test, is we also will estimate MOS based on ping results. So here, I can go into my charting. I'm going to go to my ICMP QoE is what we call that. And I'm going to take a look at it. We're going to estimate MOS value based on ICMP results. Obviously, this is not as good as the active QoE because these are not voice over IP packets. They're not tagged. It's a completely different protocol. But if this is all you can do, at least you can get some information about the performance. So I'm going to slide and drag this little spot where we drop basically down to a 0 MOS value. What that then will do is, again, zoom in on the data. It's going to give me a more granular view of what's happening with the MOS. It's going to show me the delay, and it's going to show me the packet loss. So when I went to a 0 MOS, I basically went to 100% packet loss. Just again, kind of another mechanism for you to collect some data, another example of where we're using just a very generic network monitoring tool. I'm going to ping something, and we're trying to bring a voice over IP lens to that to help you understand what will happen with voice over IP across a particular connection. All right, so that's kind of the VXPulse feature sets that I think are kind of most specific to doing assessment are the ones that I've just addressed. So if we look at the next one, monitor and fix. So I've talked about this as we've kind of gone through. Anytime I'm doing any data collection, I'm also able to create an alarm against that information. And again, that is done through the configuration templates is where I define what data is being collected. It's also where I can turn on different alarming. So for example, with a ping test, the only rule that I have selected right now is if that ping fails in total. But there are other things that you could do even when you're just looking at ping. Maybe you want to look at the delay with that ICMP response and receive an alarm if the delay goes above, X number of milliseconds. That's something that you can alarm on. If you want to receive an alarm, if I'm sending 5 packets and I only get 3 back, I want to generate an alarm in that condition. The ping test as a whole didn't fail, but I did drop some packets, so I want to understand that. Or again, that MOS calculation estimated from the ICMP, if I want to alarm based on that, I can do so. You can also do some fairly tricky things with the monitor rule. So for example, you could specify that, well, I know that this device flaps, so I don't want to see an alarm if it flaps the first time, but if it flaps, if it's down 4 tests in a row, I want to receive an alarm. You're going to be able to control that behavior. Or you may just want to delay an alarm. So, okay, if a ping fails, that's great, but wait 5 minutes. And at that 5-minute mark, if it is still down, then I want to receive an alarm, or I want to receive that notification. If it clears in the meantime, I don't want to open a ticket. Because I know that that's how this particular router or switch firewall is. I want to delay that notification. So pretty granular control. You also have very granular control over who receives alarms. And I'm doing that basically by creating contacts at whatever node I want. If a device alarms and its containing node does not have any contact information, it will roll up the tree to the next level and the next level until it finds basically a contact record to send the notifications to. So I'm going to just go into this node, go to contacts. You can see we have 1 there. I'm going to add a second one. This is going to allow you to do things like send alarms to you as well as to your customer if you choose to do so based on those contacts. So here, I do a test user. I can put, my email address in here, and I'll use another one so it's different than the first one. I can enable notifications. I have escalation levels. So escalation level 1 is set to receive that notification immediately. Maybe if I'm going in as an escalation level 2, I only want to receive notification if the device is still in alarm and the alarm has not been acknowledged after 10 minutes, then I want you to send that to me. You can also do things like controlling it based on day and hour. So if you're in a situation where you're only contracted to monitor, alarm, and take action Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, you can control what happens outside of that. Do you still open tickets, or do you wait until Monday at 8 a.m. to open the tickets over the weekend? You're able to have that level of control with this as well. Also filtering for severity levels. So when you create a monitor rule which defines an alarm condition, you are also in control of the severity level. And so you can do some different notification paths, escalation levels based on the severity of those alarms as well. By default, the alarming mechanism is email. So an email will be sent to whatever contacts are configured to that email address. I have a lot of customers where their ticketing system provides basically an email connector. So they set up a mailbox, emails go to that mailbox, the ticketing system picks it up, creates tickets for them. We've also done some custom integrations. So if you have a ticketing system that provides, as an example, a web interface, and if I get a message to that web interface, it will create a ticket. Then we've done those customizations as well. And I shouldn't say web interface, but a web service is what I meant. We've even had some customers where we've done upstream as well. So when they close a ticket, it will also acknowledge and close an alarm. So we've got some flexibility there as well. All right, let's touch a little bit on the fix part of monitor and fix. So one of the other nice features within VXPulse is a remote connectivity feature. We call that KinectMe. Let's go back to our scenario here. So if this represents one of my customers, I'm responsible for the equipment that I'm monitoring. Piece of equipment goes into alarm. You can use KinectMe to get connected to that device. Let me find a good example to show this for you. So this system is running a VX Tracker application. Okay, we provide, obviously, support on our own product sets. So if this customer comes to me and says, hey, I've got a problem with my VX Tracker, I need you to get in and fix it. Because I'm monitoring this through VXPulse, I can use KinectMe to get there. I'm going to go to KinectMe. Let's start by assuming that I think it's something that I can fix just by getting to the web interface of VX Tracker. So I'm going to make a browser connection. If I thought I needed to get to the server, we could make an RDP connection. It's going to work the same way. I'm going to click on Browser Relay. The next thing that will happen is a Java applet's going to load in my browser. Once this loads up, I'm going to get a KinectMe feature, or a KinectMe button, sorry. First of all, I want to connect to port 80 on that device, so I'll specify that. Click KinectMe. The Java applet's then making a connection to our secure relay service, which again is cloud hosted. It's also SSL connectivity, so SSL connectivity from my computer to that secure relay. Then the next thing that happens is we wait for the remote agent to send us a message. So it's going to report up data. When it does that, we're going to reply back down to it and say, by the way, you have local connectivity to that VX Tracker system. I want you to make a socket connection between yourself and port 80 on that device. Once that happens, then what's happened is it's just launched my Internet Explorer on my local computer. You can see where it's connected, localhost port 82. In effect, what we have done is create something that acts like an SSL VPN tunnel. But I haven't had to do anything other than use the KinectMe feature. And now I can log into that system the same way I would log into it if I was on the local customer's network. That remote agent, basically with its outbound SSL connection, we're writing that back in to do the connectivity to that device. So again, from the customer's network perspective, they're not allowing any inbound ports or inbound connections. We're just taking advantage of that existing agent's outbound connection to be able to get to that device. This will work basically with anything that uses known TCP or UDP ports, so the browser, RDP, SSH, Telnet, VNC, You know, we've even had, you know, this is a BCM50 application, which is a really old PBX admin application. Because it uses known TCP ports, I can define basically a profile, remote access profile, and what I'm doing here basically is just saying, okay, when we launch, here's the command to launch, here are the command line parameters to pass into that command, and you're going to use these ports. So it's very easy to add another one if you've got some other application that you want to utilize this for. Okay, so that's going to allow me basically to, you know, again, without VPN connection, without any other software, all I need is a Java-enabled web browser and a login to VXPulse. I'm going to be able to use the KinectMe to get to those devices that I'm responsible for. All right. We've got 2 minutes left. I'm sorry, I wanted to be done faster so that I could take questions. I haven't seen any questions raised. Just real quickly in the remaining 2 minutes, let me just, this part of the demo tends to put people to sleep, but I'll do it anyway because you're ready to be put to sleep. Let me show you just real briefly, I'm going to go through the other things that we can do from a monitoring perspective. And again, the easiest way for me to do that, go to a configuration template. Each one of the tabs represents something that we can do. So ping, fairly easy. Traceroute, we talked about. WMI is all about Windows servers. So we can collect CPU, memory, drive utilization, monitor services to make sure that they are running, alarm if they are not. We can scrape the Windows event logs. So I can look for specific events, or I can pull all of the logs down and alarm on things that appear there. We can collect syslog information, use HTTP to test that a web interface is up and functional. I can use Telnet to do things like test that a Microsoft SQL Server TCP port is up and accepting new connections. Collect data via SNMP, catch traps, alarm on bandwidth, collect flow data, QoE is the test calls. Link we didn't even touch on. I have the ability to dip into the link monitor archive server role, pull out all of the call quality information for calls that have gone through the link infrastructure. Very powerful stuff that I didn't get to. My apologies. Reader, I'll skip. Collect information off of the serial port. We can script backups of network routers, switches, firewalls if they provide a command line interface. And I'm out of time. Amy, how'd I do?
Wow, that was a lot. We still have a whole bunch of people on the webinar, though. We haven't lost anybody, so I'm amazed. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you have more questions, or if you have specific scenarios that you are interested in talking about further, we'll be sending out an email following this webinar with contact information for Ron Campbell and Kurt Karshik. If you are in the Pacific or Mountain time zones, Ron Campbell is your channel manager. If you are in the Central or Eastern time zones, that's Kurt Karshik. So we'll go ahead and send out their contact information later today. We did record this webinar, so we'll go ahead and put that out there as well. So you're welcome to watch it again if you need a way to fall asleep, or if you, no offense, Michael.
Whoa.
Or if you want to show it to somebody else in your organization, which is probably more likely, we'd be happy to have you do that. I only understand about half of what Michael says, so I just smile and nod sometimes. But there is a lot of great information in here. If you're not sure how this fits in your business, give us a call and let's talk about it, because I know that some of you out there are agents and maybe don't have the same setup that we've talked about here. So we'd like to talk with you more about how we can help you with some of these different scenarios. We do have our VX SWAT team, remember, that can help you with some of this technical stuff if that's not your forte. So don't discount that this isn't going to work for you because you don't have that expertise on staff. We can work with you on that.